This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. I'm very excited to be speaking with Jen Tullock about Severance. How are you, Jen?
I'm well, Abe. Good to see you.
So, this show has been quite a roller coaster, and I feel like for season two, a lot of characters have been in very different spaces, but I feel like we've actually gotten to see a lot more of Devon and Mark one on one without the, however delightful, distracting presence of Rickon.
Certainly. Yeah, it was interesting, I think, to get to explore pulling some of those threads a bit further because it offered both a window into Devon's interior world a little bit more, but also into the more complicated aspects of their sibling relationship. I think in season one, she's showing up in ways that predate her full understanding of how complicated and nefarious Lumen is. So she's able to show up in ways that feel a little warmer, that feel a little bit more supportive, but it's more shit gets more complicated this season for her and for everyone. So I think um, getting to see the moments where they don't agree, getting to see moments where they're short with each other, getting to see moments where they have like grave philosophical differences and how they should approach this plan was interesting for both of us for sure.
And Devin doesn't really get to interact with new characters that she hasn't seen or met before. But how aware are you, aside from just watching the show, of everything else that's going on that Devin couldn't possibly even imagine?
You know, when we shot the first season, I intentionally kept myself in the dark about that. I thought if she doesn't know, then I don't need to know. And so I intentionally skipped reading the Lumen bits of the script. Of course, now that is impossible because I've seen both seasons and know what has happened. But when we were working, I tried to keep my consciousness pretty focused on what the goings on of her own family life. Because if I thought too much about everything else, it sort of broadens her scope in a way that she doesn't have access to in the show. I think that, you know, meeting Milchick, that meeting with Milchick in episode two is pretty key to where she lands. As far as how she thinks about Lumen and what should or shouldn't happen to Lumen. So I think that that is a huge turning point for her. She's just coming off of thinking that Cobell slash Lumen kidnapped Eleanor, realizes that isn't true, but is like, okay, but this woman has been lying to me for months. And so when Milchick shows up in that his very threatening leather jacket, which I have never, my favorite sound in all of the show is the way that jacket moves. Whenever there is an absence of dialogue and Tramell is wearing that leather jacket and it's just crunching, I'm like, ooh, yes, there's something, that's my favorite ASMR. But I think that she, gosh, I've lost the thread. What was your question? Um, mm, 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 mm. Yes.
Not, yeah, not knowing
Thank
what else is
you.
going on.
Not knowing what else is going on. I think by the time we make it to the finale, she's keyed in enough to know. And you see it. Devon's impatient. She, in many ways, is like a child. She's intelligent, but also she's brash. And I don't think that uh, she acts on impulse. So that moment with Ragabi, for example, where Ragabi says, fine, you're not going to do what I said, so I'm leaving. It's like, well, yeah, Devon, you got yourself in that situation. You know, you sort of flew in the face of the plan. So it was fun to be able to play some more nuances in her character flaws this season for sure.
It's also, I mean, I don't dive deep into all the theories everybody has, but I do think a lot about the idea that like not being severed is actually more difficult in some ways for people because they're able to remember. Like she remembers the danger to her baby,
Yeah,
whereas Dylan doesn't know he has a family, you know, and so
right.
it's being aware of what's at stake can
Mm,
definitely put a much higher thing, which again, Devin doesn't respond to very well because she just goes with like, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm
she
gonna
does it.
be angry
Yeah, we
when
would
she
not
doesn't
want to see
necessarily.
her hold public office. I love her, but we would not want her to have the nuclear codes. But I do think that uh, yeah, she's so far in her life, I think that served her. And she's also in a very privileged position. She's married to a partner with money. She lives a pretty cushy life around like-minded people. I don't think she's met much opposition, not really in her life, beyond the opposition of being a woman in the world. But I think that it's interesting to see her bristle a little bit and feel entitled to information. I think to love a character is to understand their worst qualities as well. And I appreciate that she's impatient. I appreciate that she's not always understanding, because that's real.
We have such great scene partners, you know, in Tramell and Patricia, but also Adam, and just getting to see those brief flashes of Mark S. Does it feel like you're acting with somebody different in those moments?
When he's his any, There is something that does happen in my body that is immediately maternal because he plays Mark S with such a beautiful childlike quality, which is brilliant because the idea is his consciousness is much younger, right, than Audi Mark. So I think what Adam and all of the actors playing a separate characters do so beautifully is to show you the difference between a person who carries the weight of a lifetime of knowledge of how dark the world is and a person that doesn't. And so getting to interact with a lighter version and a younger version of the person I've come to know is really fun. And I think, to your point before about saying someone who isn't severed is carrying perhaps a different psychological burden, I do sort of compare it to sobriety. I think Devon has been forced into a sort of emotional sobriety. She's not able to forget any of this. It keeps her up at night. And so getting to play that off of Audi Mark versus any Mark is interesting.
Along those lines of knowledge, I feel like there's so much that went into within this world, the creation of Lumen and all that. But Devin knows too much. And we don't know what's going to happen with Mark, but given how season two started after the incredibly transformative events of the season one finale, we have to assume that it's going to be back to normal for a minute. And so is Devin safe? Like, do you think I'm sure if you know anything, you can't say anything, but I imagine you probably don't even know anything just because it's still in the works. But what could be ahead for her? What are the paths she could possibly take?
I feel like that path could split into any number of ways. My hope for her is that she is able to find her own peace in the fractured family she's come to know at this moment in her life. My hope for her is that she's able to see a version of her plan through. But I don't know. I have no idea. I think the beauty of the writing on that show is that it's impossible to predict. And so I will be reading those scripts with the same amount of excitement as you'll be watching them, I imagine.
I also think again, while Rickon's personality can be a little overbearing sometimes, I would have liked to see him as part of some of these moments, trying to talk to, Mark S like a child or something else. What do you think the future holds for them as a couple?
I think the price we paid in following the storyline that Rickon is potentially collaborating with Lumen following his meeting with Natalie is that we had to see a fissure between him and Devon. And because of that, I think we lost his presence a little more, which was a bummer because I'm Michael Chernus's biggest fan and he's just a genius. And so any moment I get to be in a scene with him is a happy day for me. So I missed him, but I also understand. And my hope is that that's because we're setting Rickon up for a really rich storyline in a potential further season. So I missed him, but I'm always excited to see what happens with Rick. And I think he's as susceptible to Lumen's promises as anyone that has been severed. So we will see.
There's a sort of like surreal quality to just the way everybody interacts, even not, in their severed selves, just that it doesn't, especially with Bert and Irving and all that, something feels off, not just about the innies, but also about the outies too.
Yeah, I think it's like applying a satirical lens to a show that is not satirical, which I appreciate because it toes a really fine tonal line between a deeply felt human observation and also a satire of human folly and of capitalism and of work culture. So I think only the wild and zany brain of Dan Erickson could have created a world where we say things like, what does Milchick say? Devour. Uh, Oh my goodness, what does he say? I've seen it needle pointed at feculence. Feculence, devour feculence. We could see a character say in earnest, devour feculence within an episode where you also see these really heartfelt human exchanges. So I think that's special.
If there were no limitations on storytelling, who would you most want to have Devon share a scene with?
Oh God. I mean, I love everybody so much. If I ever got to interact in any way, in or out of character with Gwendolyn Christie, I'd be a happy guy. I find her so fascinating and I've only hung out with her a handful of times, but I find, what she did with that character to be so interesting and cool. And I do think that seeing the sort of, uh, grounded, sarcastic, lived in quality Devon has interact with someone that is so much more heightened would be really funny. I think that would be my vote. It would be Gwendolyn.
I just finished talking to her, and she has such an incredible energy for the character. So much because again, it's like that's somebody we've barely seen. She's a big name from Game of Thrones, but she's in a very, very small part of the show,
But
but just
man, she
occupies
makes a
such a
meal
big
of it.
space.
When I met her the first time, we were at an event for the show, and she came up and I'm the size of a cashew, so I was like, "Hello, ma'am," and she came over in her like beautiful energy and elegant outfit. She said, "Oh, darling, I love the show. Yes, the scene with the beds." And I sort of became like an enamored 6-year-old. I was just like, "Yes, ma'am. She's one of a kind."
Well, now that you've started paying attention to what else is going on in the show, are you also following along with any fan theories?
Yes, so they've come across my desk. It's funny. I've heard from people that I otherwise would never have. Let's say folks from high school, for example. I was like, oh, I haven't heard from you in 18 years. You're telling me Rickon is a goat. That's good. So I think that it's funny uh, to be a part of something that has grabbed a moment in the zeitgeist in this way, where you do have access to people's opinions, perhaps more than you would. I've been on shows I liked, but maybe that weren't didn't have as wide an audience, and so this is definitely a markable difference. Hearing from folks and them offering in my email or on my social media their theories about who is and isn't a goat and whether or not Devon is actually working for Lumen and listen, I someone sent me a Reddit thread, and one night after a couple glasses of champagne, I went sledding down that slope, and I found some interesting tidbits.
Well, for the fans who will be Severance stars soon, are there shows you mentioned from your past that you'd recommend? It's like this is a great chance to get something that may not
God,
be like Severance, but you can
yes, let me
recognize
just look
someone
at
in it.
my, I worked on a show called Perry Mason that I was very proud of, and primarily for a Severance fan because it was so different to this character. I got to play a sort of sultry 1930s screenwriter that smoked long cigarettes and wore gowns. So gone were the days of Devon's wools and knits, but that was a show I was really proud of and really enjoy and would be a fun counter for sure. And my friend Hannah and I made a movie called Before You Know It that I also enjoy that you can rent on the internet.
I have seen both those projects, so I endorse those
Wow.
recommendations.
Okay, well, I'm impressed. Thanks.
Well, what else are you watching? What would you recommend just based on your own taste to people who are looking for their next great binge or obsession?
My wife and I just got through the first episode of Adolescence, and oh my God, the rumors are true. It is one of a kind television. I think Erin Doherty, who is an English actress who played young Princess Anne on The Crown, I've been following her as a super fan for a long time, and she is stunning in this show. And I don't know if you know, but the every episode is a oneer. So every episode is one continuous take, and they somehow pull it off without it feeling like a gimmick. It still feels so compelling, and the writing and the acting is incredible. So cannot recommend enough. And then, of course, I'm watching White Lotus. I would be crazy not to. I'm watching White Lotus. I can't wait to see what happens. I mean, Parker Posey doing a North Carolina accent for me is worth its weight in gold. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jen. It was a pleasure to meet you. I look forward to seeing what comes next for Devin and for you.
you too. Thanks, Abe.